Hello, you guys. I am back today with another ASMR video, and this is going to be a true crime video. And I meant to record this a while ago. This particular case I meant to cover it a while ago, but I just didn't end up getting around to it until now. There is a lot of information out there about this particular case, and I'm not going to be doing a super in-depth discussion or deep dive, but I did want to cover this case because I find it to be very interesting and I just want to discuss it. So the case that I'm going to be discussing today is the Dupont de Ligonnès family case, I guess you could call it. And I do want to say before I start that if you are uncomfortable with true crime discussion in an ASMR format or true crime in any way, please click off of this video. This will include some pretty disturbing subject matter. So yeah, that's just a little warning. And also I wanted to say thank you to everyone who has continued to watch my videos. I'm sorry I haven't been super consistent. I've been pretty busy lately, but I'm trying to make it work. So I just appreciate each and every one of you. And if you are not subscribed yet and you would like to, that would be amazing. This case is pretty fast, and like I said, there's a lot of information out there, but I'm just going to be doing my best to cover the basis of what occurred. I will be leaving all of my sources in the description as well, and I think I actually first heard about this case from the Netflix docuseries that is like a reboot of Unsolved Mysteries from 2020. There was an episode on it, and it is from volume 1, and it's episode 3. And the name of the episode is House of Terror, just so you guys are aware of that. It's a really good series in general, and I remember this episode really stuck out to me. So, yeah. Okay, so here is some background on the Dupont family. I'm just going to refer to them as that. Dupont. For most of it, the family consisted of Xavier Pierre Marie Dupont de Ligonnès, who was the father, and he was 50 years old. His wife was Agnès Dupont de Ligonnès. She was 49, and their 4 children: Arthur, 20 years old; Thomas, 18 years old; Anne, 16, and Benoît, 13. And they also had 2 Labrador dogs. Their family, and also the ages of the people the family members are their ages when this case took place, which I'm sure you already know that, but just to let you know, the family lived in a modest house at 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann, which is in the western suburbs of Nantes, France. And the Duponts were an old aristocratic family originally from Annonay in southeastern France. Their ancestors were wealthy and notable individuals, including Charles Dupont de Ligonnès, who was the Bishop of Rodez at a point in his life. And so they come from a wealthy background. They're notable people. By the way, if I pronounce anything wrong, I'm so sorry. I did take French in school, but that is just gone from my mind at this point, especially when it comes to pronunciation. So I apologize. Xavier was born in 1961, and his father, Bernard, was a count and an engineer. His mother's name was Genevieve, and we don't really know what she did Xavier as his father, but he wasn't technically his son. Thomas, the second oldest, was born in 1992, and the only daughter was born in 1994, and finally Benoît was born in 1997. By all accounts, the Dupont family was very well respected in their area and were even called near perfect, quote unquote, by some, which we all know when people say that in true crime cases. Whenever we hear that, you know things are not perfect at all. There's always something going on, usually at least, and nobody's perfect. So now we're going to get into the timeline of events from this case, which spans over the course of several weeks. During the weeks leading up to this case, Xavier closed the lease on the family's home, closed the family's bank accounts, and settled the final payments that were due with the children's schools. He then contacted Agnes's employer and told them that she was suffering from gastroenteritis, and 2 days later, the employer received a text saying Agnes had been hospitalized and could not be contacted by phone. The following week, the employer received a letter from Agnès officially terminating her employment and explaining that she was following her husband to the United States. A message was placed on the family's mailbox that said, "Return all mail to sender, thank you." The house was then partially emptied, and Xavier purchased cement, a shovel, a hoe, as well as rifle bullets, and he purchased those on March 12th, so clearly something's going on. He also registered at a shooting range to the north of Nantes, which he visited 4 times between March 26th and April 1st. He obtained his firearms license on February 2nd, 2011, and Thomas and Benoît had also started to learn how to shoot, while Arthur was scheduled to start. A sales receipt was also found in the home after the investigation was started from a DIY store that was located about 200 miles from the Dupont home, which comes out to about a 3.5 hour drive. The receipt was dated to either March 23rd or 30th. I guess the actual day couldn't be made out on the receipt or something. And it listed several purchases, including a roll of large bin liners and a box of adhesive plastic paving slabs. Now going to April of 2011, Arthur, the eldest son, left for college and did not turn up to the pizzeria where he was working to pick up his monthly wages, and his boss was surprised by this, and he said that Arthur always came to collect his wages on the first day of the month. On Saturday, April 2nd, sorry, I lost my spot in my notes for a second. On Saturday, April 2nd, Xavier made another strange purchase: 4 bags of quicklime, each 10 kilograms or about 22 pounds each, from different shops around Nantes. On Sunday, April 3rd, one of the Dupont family neighbors saw Agnès for the last time, and shortly afterwards, he saw Xavier putting large bags into his car. Just to add, Xavier's car was a Citroën, I believe is how you pronounce it, Citroën C5, and I'll put up a picture of it. Later that day, the family went to dinner at a restaurant and then to the movies, so clearly there was something kind of weird going on, but Xavier was trying to make it seem like everything was fine. Later that night at around 10:40 p.m., Xavier called his sister Christine and left her voicemail attempted, and Benoit's friends attempted to get a hold of them. The same day, Xavier spoke with his sister for about 20 to 30 minutes, and according to her, everything seemed perfectly normal and fine. At around 9 p.m., Xavier and his son Thomas went to a high-end restaurant called La Croix Cadeau in a town called Avril, and according to the staff of the restaurant, the pair barely spoke during their meal, and Thomas began to feel unwell at the end of their dinner. Now we're going to get into the main point of this case, I guess you could say, the actual occurrence itself. I was just kind of discussing the build-up, and now this is what actually happened. So, investigators who worked this case believe that Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès murdered his wife and 3 of his children on the night of April 3rd to 4th. So it was either on the 3rd or the 4th, or it might have been like the early, like 2 a.m. time on the 4th. They're not 100% sure, and I will get into why they aren't sure. And then he proceeded to murder his son Thomas on the evening of April 5th. Things get a little bit tricky from here on out, like I said, because according to some of the neighbors of the Dupont family, they saw Agnès around noon on April 5th and again on the 7th, but according to everything that we know about the timeline, like Anne and Benoît not showing up for school, etc., this would just throw off the timeline completely. So investigators still think it was the 3rd or the 4th. And it's possible that Xavier was holding his family hostage for a period of time, but this is pretty unlikely given everything that was discovered. So it's more likely that the neighbors were just mistaken on their dates, but it does make things a little bit more questionable as to when everything occurred. So on the night of April 5th, Thomas was at a friend's house when he received a message from his father telling him that he needed to come home that night because his mother had been in a cycling accident. Thomas went home and his friend he was with the night before tried to reach him the next day, but he only got a brief response from Thomas, in quotes, saying that he was ill and he was not coming back to class that week. A couple days later, that friend received a text from Thomas, in quotes once again, claiming that his phone charger was broken and that he was trying to find a new one. So, it's kind of like, inferring that this was not Thomas texting him because it was just weird responses. And that was the last time anyone heard from Thomas. Thomas's ex-girlfriend claimed that the day before his disappearance he had been acting strangely. He seemed to be down and didn't show up to music rehearsal that he told her he would be attending. And this calls into question again the extent in which the rest of the family sensed Xavier's intentions, or at least knew that something was up. At some point during this week, neighbors heard the family dogs barking and howling for 2 nights in a row, and then after that, the dogs were never heard from again. So 2 nights in a row they were being loud, never heard from after that. Although investigators were not 100% sure when all of these murders took place, it was clear to them that by April 6th, everyone in the family was dead except for Xavier. Also on the 6th of April, Arthur's girlfriend was concerned, understandably so, that she had not heard from him in the past few days, so she actually went to the family home and knocked on the door, and even though she saw that the lights were on, the dogs were not barking as they normally would, and nobody answered the door. On April 7th, several people saw Xavier loading up his car with several bags, and this is also the same day that they claimed to see Agnès, but this could just be them misremembering the dates, like I said before. By April 8th, Xavier was clearly prepping for his disappearance, and according to investigators, that was the last day the family's computer IP address was used, and Xavier wrote a message on a Catholic message board. And he also sent an email to Xavier's mother, sister, and brother-in-law, assuring them that everything was fine and that they would hear more soon. On April 11th, Anne and Benoit's school received a letter stating that they would no longer be attending the school as their family was moving to Australia due to urgent professional changes, and Agnès, her work, got a similar letter explaining that she had to leave for the same reason. So earlier I mentioned that there was a letter sent to Agnes's work, and like he paid Anne and Benoit's school the money that they owed them and stuff. So I'm not sure if he sent another letter or if the dates were just confused, because in the first time that he talked to Agnes's work, he mentioned that she had like stomach issues, she had gastroenteritis, so I'm not really sure on that, but he sent another letter on the 11th. Then on the same day, April 11th, a typed letter was sent to Xavier and Agnes's immediate family, and April 11th was a date typed on the letter. And in this letter, Xavier claimed that he had been working for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency and that his family had to relocate to the United States as part of the U.S. Witness Protection Program. He wrote, as a result, no one would be able to contact them for a few years, and asked his family to circulate the story that the family had moved to Australia for work reasons. So clearly, it's just like this whole plot to make it seem like everything is okay and that they're just disappearing because they're in the witness protection program. Like, what? There's technically no proof that this letter was actually written and sent by Xavier because it was unsigned, and if there was a DNA test performed on the letter, the results of that test are not known to the public. And you can read the full letter online. I am not going to read the entire thing just in a matter of saving some time because it's kind of a long letter, but it is out there. It's been translated into English. Agnes's family was immediately suspicious of the letter that, and they sent it to the Nantes District Attorney's Office so that they could look into it further. Later in the day on April 11th, Xavier started to move, and he spent the night at Hotel Premier class in a town that was 6 hours away from Nantes by car. The next night he was going to a different area in southeastern France where he spent the night at I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce that name. He stayed at a different hotel under a fake name of Mr. Laurent Xavier. And on April 13th, neighbors began to get concerned about the family because the house had still been shut up and just completely, like, they didn't see any activity going on for about a week at this point. And Agnes's car hadn't moved at all. They contacted the police, who went to go do a wellness check at the house, and they discovered that it was locked. So they ended up calling a locksmith to open the front door. When they looked around, they found that everything appeared to be in place despite the fact that no one was home. Some sheets had been removed from the beds, and some of the closet doors were open, but other than that, everything seemed normal. And that night on the 13th, Xavier stayed at a different hotel, and it was in the French Riviera. And Xavier previously lived in this town that he was staying in the 80s, and a former girlfriend of his told the police that Xavier got into contact with her that night, though the two didn't actually meet up in person. The next day, on April 14th, Xavier withdrew 30 euros from the ATM and stayed the night at a hotel. Again, it's called Hotel Formula 1. I can pronounce that one. And this town is located in the southeastern coast of France along the Mediterranean Sea, just down the road from Cannes and Nice. surveillance camera that night, and that was the last known sighting of him. On April 15th, he checked out of that hotel for the day. That was the last hotel he stayed at. And as far as we know, he disappeared off the face of the earth at this point. He abandoned his car at the hotel and either took off on foot or used public transportation, but he has not been seen since. The same day, on April 15th, police returned to the house to do a more thorough investigation, and this time they noticed that photos were missing from picture frames, and Agnes's family at this point was putting pressure on the police to investigate further, so they returned to the house on the 18th, 19th, and 20th. Still did not find anything suspicious, and then on the 21st, the lieutenant did some digging under the porch and discovered something extremely worrying, and that was plastic bags bound up with tape buried in the dirt. On April 21st, 2011, the district attorney officially opened an investigation into the disappearances of Xavier and his family. In the middle of the press conference the DA was holding to announce this, he received a phone call informing him that several bodies had been discovered underneath the porch of the family home. The bodies were wrapped in blankets, and that would explain the missing sheets from the beds, and then they were placed in plastic bags. There were small religious items placed next to each body, a cross, a candle, a rosary, etc. And they did testing, which quickly revealed that the bodies belonged to the Dupont family minus Xavier. According to the autopsies, all 4 of the children had been drugged with sleeping pills and then shot with a .22 long rifle in the head. There were no drugs found in Agnes's system, but her sleep apnea machine stopped at 3 a.m. on the morning of April 4th, leading investigators to believe that was the time of her death and that she was the first victim. Agnes, Arthur, Anne, and Benoît were all found in the same grave, while Thomas's body was in a separate grave. And a journalist named Anne Sophie Martin speculated that the reason Xavier killed Thomas last is perhaps because he was hesitating to kill his eldest biological son. So, I don't know if that's just her theory. There were actually no traces of blood found in the bedrooms or in any of the rooms of the home. There was also no physical evidence, aka DNA or fingerprints, found on the bodies. The neighbors also had not heard gunshots, however, a silencer could have muffled the sounds. And Xavier bought a silencer in March. Given the fact that there was no sign of Xavier or his body, he was immediately the #1 suspect in the death of his family, and no alternate suspect has ever been proposed by the police. I also forgot to mention that the 2 Labrador dogs were killed and buried as well. So he just completely massacred his entire family and then buried them. And it was done in such a methodical way that clearly, and we know from the background of what he purchased beforehand, that he had been planning this for some time. A funeral was held for the family later, a week later, and Agnes and her children were laid to rest at the St. Felice Church in Nantes, which is the same church that the family regularly attended. Although it was a simple ceremony, more than 1,400 people turned up to pay their respects. And with the discovery of the family's bodies, the investigation, which started as a missing persons case, now became a manhunt. And that same night, investigators discovered Xavier's abandoned car in the Hotel Formula One parking lot. There were many searches carried out about a week later in the department of Var, where Xavier had spent his last few days before vanishing. wasn't exactly trying to hide. He was going to restaurants using his credit card, taking out money. He was seen several times on CCTV cameras. And it's really weird that the amount of prep that he took that he did while preparing to murder his entire family, he did all of that, but he didn't prepare, it seemed, for his escape plan. He just did whatever he felt like doing. And the investigators eventually concluded, or they kind of, speculated that Xavier intended to commit suicide. And one of the chief of police, who's now retired, pointed out that a vast majority of family annihilators end up committing suicide shortly after murdering their families. They didn't really think that Xavier was trying to plan to get away and start a new life, but he knew that he wasn't going to be around much longer, so he really didn't care. He didn't plan out his activities after that. And on the last CCTV image found of Xavier from the parking lot of the Hotel Formula One, investigators observed that the bag he was carrying appeared to have a long object laying along the bottom, which they thought could have been his rifle. And there was obviously a huge media frenzy around this case, and it shifted into high gear following the discovery of the bodies underneath the porch. Several more searches have been carried out over the years. On June 23rd, 2011, caving experts searched 40 caves within a 10-mile radius of where Xavier was last seen, as investigators believed Xavier may have tried to escape on foot through mountains surrounding the area and maybe ended up perishing in one of the caves, but they did not turn up anything. And there were 2 more searches of the mountains and caves in that area in 2013, but they both came up unsuccessful. In 2013, again, a body was found approximately 12 miles away from where Xavier was last seen. The autopsy was inconclusive when it came to whether or not the body belonged to Xavier, with the last official report being that prosecutors did not believe it to be Xavier's body. Another body was found in this area near 2015, however, this one was definitely not Xavier. From DNA testing, they could conclude that. So to this day, suicide remains the leading theory in what happened to Xavier, but we still don't know for sure. And the only real evidence that Xavier may still be alive comes from a letter received by a Nantes journalist in July 2015. This journalist received a photograph of 2 of the Dupont de Ligonnès children, Arthur and Benoît, sitting at their kitchen table. On the back of this photograph was written, in quotes, "I'm still alive." So, of course, there's nothing that really proves this was from Xavier. It could have just been someone trolling, because people like to do that because they're really fucked up. So, obviously, because there was a worldwide manhunt for Xavier, there have been a lot of sightings of him over the years, of people thinking that they see him in a bunch of different places, and none of them have led anywhere. So yeah, there's a lot of different theories from people that he's still out there, he moved somewhere. One theory is that he went to go live on a monastery, all kinds of different things, which we often see with unsolved cases. Xavier's family members have remained steadfast to this day that he is innocent. And, I understand that it's their family member, their loved one, but there's just so much evidence out there that he is the perpetrator of this. But yeah, they still believe it, and to this day, they remain the same on their thoughts of the case. Because Xavier was never found, there is no true explanation for why he decided to commit this heinous act, but from so on. So I hope that one day we will get more answers on this